Usually when we talk about trying to understand the world, we lean on things that are, like, visible, tangible things.
Right, the physical artifacts, the stuff you can actually touch.
Exactly. If you're trying to understand a massive ancient tradition, you usually look at the physical evidence it left behind, or you read the translated quotes on motivational posters.
Or those serene nature calendars with the misty mountains and the bamboo.
Oh yeah, definitely those. You absorb all these pop culture adaptations, and you start to think you have a pretty solid grasp on the full picture. You assume you've seen the whole map.
Which is a very common trap. I mean, it makes sense why people do it.
Right, but then you zoom out, or someone shifts your perspective just slightly, and you realize you have only been looking at a tiny, highly sanitized corner of that map, maybe even less than half.
That is the exact predicament most people face when they first truly encounter Taoism. The cognitive dissonance can be, well, it can be quite jarring.
Because most of us, when we hear the word Taoism, we immediately picture a tranquil sage sitting by a river.
Just talking about going with the flow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We think of it as this purely philosophical, almost passive approach to life. But for this deep dive today, we are unlocking a hidden, highly mystical, and honestly incredibly rigid and structured world.
We really are. We're diving headfirst into religious Taoism.
Because the version of Taoism that has gained traction here in the West is, well, it's an incredibly heavily edited fragment.
Heavily edited. It has been completely stripped of its ritual engine, its cosmology, and its rigorous methodologies.
It's a beautiful fragment, sure.
Yeah.
But it is entirely divorced from the living, breathing ecosystem that actually produced it.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to take a massive stack of dense academic source material and extract the real story.
Specifically, we're looking at an incredibly extensive entry from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy by the scholar Fabrizio Pregadio.
It's a fantastic source, and we are going to use it to map out how the Taoist universe was actually believed to function.
We are going to explore a cosmos packed with inner gods, sprawling bureaucratic heavens, alchemical crucibles, and like a very literal quest to cheat death.
But before we take that first step, we have to establish a foundational ground rule for our discussion today.
Okay, lay it on me.
We are going to treat these historical texts, these ritual diagrams, and these cosmic maps as the absolute reality of the people who lived them.
I think that's crucial.
Yeah, we are not approaching this to debunk their science or to impose some modern, cynical lens on their beliefs. We are stepping inside their architecture to understand it from the inside out.
Right. We check our modern skepticism at the door, and we step fully into their cosmos. So let's start by addressing the elephant in the room.
The big Western misunderstanding.
Yeah, the source immediately points this out. Scholars apparently refer to it as a sinological dogma. What exactly is that?
So it's this artificial division between what has been labeled philosophical Taoism, known as daojia, and religious Taoism, known as daojiao.
And that division is totally fake.
Well, for over a century, Western scholars, and by extension, the general public, made a very clear, very biased decision. They looked at pure poetic texts like the Dao Jing and declared that to be the real original Taoism.
The pure philosophy part.
Exactly. Meanwhile, they looked at the centuries of actual rituals, the pantheon of gods and the alchemy, and just dismissed all of that as later superstitious decay.
But the source is explicitly clear that the Taoist canon itself, the Daozang, this massive historical collection of thousands of texts, never actually makes this distinction.
No, it doesn't. To the practitioners and the authors of those texts, daojia and daojiao are practically synonymous.
So they didn't see themselves as philosophers versus priests.
Not at all. I mean, they didn't utilize modern Western categories like philosophy or religion because those conceptual boxes just didn't exist in the pre-modern Chinese worldview.
They spoke more about lineages, right?
Yes, the lineage of the Dao and the teachings of the Dao. In their minds, you cannot possess a profound teaching without a lineage of masters to transmit it.
And a lineage is meaningless without the teaching itself. They're two sides of the same coin.
Precisely. So trying to separate the abstract thoughts of the Dao Jing from the physical rituals and the alchemy.
It's like trying to explain the history of Christianity, but refusing to mention the church, the rituals, the popes, or the theology.
That's a great comparison.
Like, just focusing on a few quotes about being kind to your neighbor and ignoring the rest. It renders the whole tradition incomprehensible.
When we try to force Taoism into these modern Western boxes, we do it a tremendous disservice. We end up cherry-picking the aspects that appeal to our secular sensibilities.
And discarding the entire operational framework that gave those ideas their actual power. Wait, let me unpack this just to make sure I'm fully grasping the scale here.
Go ahead.
Treating Laozi, the legendary author of the Dao Jing, as just some dusty intellectual philosopher dispensing life advice that is essentially a modern Western invention.
It absolutely is.
So we took a vast living ecosystem and decided to only look at the dried leaves that blew over to us.
The dried leaves is an excellent way to picture it. You are looking at the leaves and completely ignoring the roots, the subterranean networks, the branches, and the entire climate that allowed the tree to grow in the first place.
Wow. Okay, so to really understand Taoism, we have to look at those foundational texts, not as isolated essays, but as origin points for interacting with reality itself.
Exactly. So let's dive into those foundational roots. We have the Dao Jing, written somewhere around the 4th to 3rd century BCE, and the Zhuangzi.
And they introduce these massive core concepts, the primary one being the Tao itself, right? The way.
Right, which is described as formless, nameless, and the absolute origin of all existence.
And then there's Wu Wei, which is a term that gets thrown around a lot, usually translated as non-doing or non-action.
Yeah, and non-doing is a translation that often leads to severe misinterpretation.
Because it sounds like you're just being lazy.
Exactly. It does not imply lethargy or just sitting around waiting for things to happen to you. Wu Wei means acting without personal, ego-driven intention.
Okay, so it's acting without forcing an artificial structure onto a situation.
Right. The practitioner of Wu Wei takes the operation of the Tao itself as their model.
So it's more about like hydrodynamic efficiency. It's not doing nothing. It's swimming with the current rather than exhausting yourself thrashing against it.
That captures the mechanism perfectly. The Taoist sage operates in the world by responding dynamically to what circumstances actually require in the present moment.
Not by imposing some preconceived, rigid will upon the world.
Exactly. It is an incredibly active state, but it is entirely devoid of friction.
And then the Zhuangzi takes these concepts and pushes them even further, right?
It really does. It argues that the Tao is ultimately completely unknowable to the ordinary, rational human mind.
Which is a bold claim for a philosophical text.
Well, the text focuses heavily on inner freedom, specifically freedom from societal rules, language, and our ingrained patterns of logic.
The source mentions a practice Zhuangzi introduces, called the fasting of the mind. What exactly is that?
So, our ordinary human cognition functions entirely by establishing relative distinctions. We define things by what they are not.
Like right versus wrong, beautiful versus ugly.
Self versus other. Exactly. Zhuangzi argues that to truly grasp the Tao, you have to literally starve the mind of these dualistic distinctions.
Starve the mind. That's an intense metaphor.
You have to bypass ordinary cognition entirely and cultivate what he calls a knowledge that does not know.
It's a complete dismantling of how we are taught to perceive reality.
Mm-hmm.
But, okay, if the goal is this radical, structureless inner freedom, and if Laozi wasn't just a philosopher, who was he to the early Daoists?
That is the big question.
Because our source details a massive historical pivot here. Human thinkers in this tradition don't just stay human thinkers. They elevate.
They transform into cosmic entities, and to trace how a philosopher becomes a deity, we have to look at the primordial soup out of which organized Taoism eventually emerged.
Right, the practitioners who were operating on the ground before it all coalesced into a formal religion. Take us back to that landscape. What did the spiritual world of ancient China actually look like?
In ancient Chinese society, you had a prominent class of practitioners known as the Wu. These were essentially shamans, spirit mediums, and exorcists.
Okay, so dealing with the supernatural directly.
Right. They dealt directly with localized demons, they entered ecstatic trances to communicate with the dead, and administered herbal remedies.
But the critical detail our source points out is that this ecstatic, possessed trance of the Wu never became a foundational part of mainstream Taoist practice.
Which is fascinating, isn't it?
I found it incredibly surprising.
Mm-mm.
Usually when we think of the roots of ancient mysticism, we assume it stems from shamanic trance states, people losing control and channeling spirits.
But Taoism evolved from a completely different intellectual lineage, a group called the Fangxi.
The Fangxi.
Who were they?
The term translates roughly to masters of the methods. These were not possessed mediums. They were highly educated technicians. Technicians. That implies a very different approach.
They were experts in cosmology, astrology, numerology, divination, medicine, and early longevity practices.
So if the Wu were the shamans pleading with erratic spirits, the Fangxi were the engineers trying to read the blueprints of the universe.
Exactly. The scholar John Lagerwey makes a brilliant observation here. He notes that the true predecessor of the Taoist priest is not the shaman, but the diviner.
The diviner. because they're looking for structure.
Right. A diviner looks at the chaotic natural world and perceives a deeply rational structure beneath it, a structure built on recurring images, cosmic emblems, and mathematically precise cycles.
And these Fangxi were obsessed with mapping the absolute limits of reality. The source brings up an extraordinary poem from the 2nd century BCE called Far Roaming.
The Yuan Yu. It is a vital piece of the puzzle.
Tell me about it. It reads like ancient science fiction.
It kind of is. The poem describes a highly structured, ecstatic journey. The traveler doesn't just wander aimlessly. They systematically visit the absolute remotest corners of the earth.
And then they go upright.
Yes, they ascend into the celestial palaces of the stars, and they ultimately enter the realm of the great beginning, the origin of the cosmos.
But they weren't writing this as just mere entertainment.
No, this vivid imagery of far roaming actually became the architectural blueprint for Daoist meditation later on. Practitioners would use these texts to literally visualize themselves walking along the constellations.
They were internalizing the map of the universe.
Exactly. It became a concrete methodology for absorbing the pure primordial energies that they believed could only be found at the very edges of the universe.
Okay, so we have the philosophical depth of the Daojing, and we have the highly technical methodologies of the Fangxi. But you can have philosophers and technicians running around for centuries without ever forming a massive religion.
You need a catalyst.
A spark. And the source pinpoints exactly when that happens. It's the 2nd century CE. The Han Dynasty is collapsing.
The empire is fracturing.
Yeah, natural disasters, plagues, utter social tumult.
And history shows us time and again that when the bedrock of society collapses, populations turn to eschatology and salvation.
They want a savior.
Right. In the Chinese context of the 2nd century, this manifested as intense millenarianism. Widespread prophecies began to circulate about a coming Messiah and the dawn of an era called the Great Peace.
The taping. They believe a perfect divine ruler was going to descend, wipe out the corrupt dynasty, and establish a perfect society.
And who do they cast in the role of this supreme Messiah?
The author of the Tao Jing, Laozi himself, which is just wild to me.
This is the turning point where Taoism as a religion truly crystallizes. A pivotal text emerges called the Taiping Jing, the Book of the Great Peace. By the middle of the 2nd century, Laozi is completely divinized.
He is stripped of his mere historical mortality and becomes Lord Laozhen.
Yes.
I am still wrapping my head around this leap. Laozi shifts from being a wise old archivist who wrote a profound book to a literal descending cosmic savior.
It's quite the promotion.
Let me try an analogy. That is like modern society collapsing and a massive religion springing up that claims William Shakespeare wasn't just a playwright, but a time-traveling demigod who is going to descend from the clouds, obliterate the government, and rewrite the laws of physics.
As wild as that sounds to modern ears, it is functionally identical to what happened.
That is insane.
The Taoist texts begin to reveal a radical new theology. The Tao itself is not just a passive, formless void. It takes an active, compassionate role in the human world.
So Lord Lao is the literal personification of the Tao.
Yes. And they reasoned that the historical man named Laozi was merely one of many avatars. Just one of many temporary forms, this supreme deity took over the eons to gently guide humanity.
Which completely shatters that Western philosophy box we talked about earlier. You cannot separate the philosophy from the theology when the author of the philosophy is literally the creator of the universe in human form.
You cannot. And the most crucial consequence of this theology is that once you have a descending cosmic messiah actively granting new divine instructions, people don't just sit alone in the woods meditating.
Right.
They form hierarchical communities based on these new revelations.
Which transitions us perfectly into the actual human societies that emerged, the earthly bureaucracies of the divine.
Because this tradition is fundamentally about massive, meticulous social organization.
Right. We need to trace the evolution of the major schools, starting with the way of the celestial masters, the Tianxi Dao.
So tradition states that in the year 142 CE, the newly divinized Lord Lao appeared in a revelation to a man named Zhang Daling. Lord Lao established a formal covenant with him, naming Zhang the very first celestial master. Armed with this divine mandate, Zhang Daling and his descendants organized an autonomous, independent theocracy in what is now Sichuan province.
A full-blown theocracy operating independently within China.
Yes, and they subdivided the state into 24 administrations or parishes.
But what is truly staggering is how they governed their population. They didn't just use standard laws or military force. They governed through cosmic paperwork.
That's a great way to put it. They instituted a system based on registers known as Lu. These were literal, physical, bureaucratic documents.
Household registers tracking births, marriages, deaths.
Meticulously tracked. Furthermore, every initiated member received an individual register that conferred their specific rank within both the social hierarchy and the celestial bureaucracy.
And these registers didn't just list your name, they listed the specific divine guardian spirits that you had under your personal command, right?
Exactly. As you aged and advanced in the community's moral hierarchy, your register was updated and you were granted more spirits.
It's a literal chain of command linking the peasant to the heavens.
It provided an incredible sense of order and cosmic security in a time of absolute terrestrial chaos.
But I think the most revealing aspect of the Celestial Masters, the thing that shows how deeply this bureaucratic mindset permeated their reality, is how they viewed illness.
Oh, their view of illness is fascinating.
Yeah. If you fell ill in this community, they didn't consult a medical doctor about your humors, and they didn't bring in a shaman for an exorcism. If you got sick, it meant you had committed a moral fault. You had sinned.
Illness was entirely decoupled from biology or demonic possession. It was a symptom of a bureaucratic infraction against the moral order of the universe.
And therefore, the cure had to be a bureaucratic process.
You couldn't just drink a willow bark potion. The afflicted individual would have to confess their specific sins. Then, a priest would draft highly formalized written petitions to the celestial deities,
Specifically addressing the officers of earth, water, and heaven. So the priest is basically acting as an attorney.
Essentially, yes. The petition would formally report the sick person's transgression, officially log their confession, and then request the celestial authorities to dispatch healing buys and pardon the individual.
The mechanics of this are just brilliant. They are curing physiological diseases with moral confession paperwork.
It's very logical within their framework.
It's as if they constructed a spiritual department of motor vehicles. But instead of waiting in line to renew your driver's license, you're submitting forms to renew your physical health.
The bureaucratic metaphor is the beating heart of religious Daoism. It originates right here with the celestial masters. The universe is an administration, and your survival depends entirely on filing your paperwork correctly.
Maintain a clean record.
Exactly.
But the evolution of Daoism doesn't stop in Sichuan. The Han Dynasty finally shatters completely, China fragments, and we see massive migrations heading south.
Right, and as the celestial master traditions move south, they collide with the deeply entrenched southern traditions. Which brings us to a crucial historical figure in the 4th century named Geihong.
Geihong. He gives us a window into the aristocracy of the South before the organized religion arrives, right?
He does. Geihong and his peers were not particularly interested in communal registers or confessing sins to bureaucrats.
What were they interested in?
They were focused on the intense, individual pursuit of longevity and protection. They were utilizing heavy magic.
The source mentions their reliance on protective talismans, intricate written scripts designed to shield the bearer from demons or even weapons.
But more significantly, Geihong documented the obsession with physical immortality through external alchemy.
He scoffed at just using herbal medicines to extend life by a few decades.
He was in pursuit of the ultimate prize, compounding divine elixirs that would instantly grant unending physical immortality and elevate the practitioner to the ranks of the divine.
So we have the communal, bureaucratic celestial masters moving south, crashing into this aristocratic, alchemical southern culture. And what happens next is a profound synthesis.
They merge and elevate, creating two massive, sophisticated new schools. Shangqing, which translates to highest clarity, and Lingbao, which means numinous treasure.
These two represent the real blossoming of Daoist theology. Let's start with Shangqing. It emerges from revelations in the late 4th century, and it's highly introverted, right?
Very meditative. Their central text moves away from the external laboratory of the alchemists. They begin to internalize the cosmic processes.
The focus shifts to intense visualization, visualizing the myriad gods that reside inside the organs of the human body.
We will definitely explore those inner gods later because the implications are staggering.
Oh, I can't wait to talk about the parasites. But what about the other school, Lingbao?
If Shangqing is the introverted path, Lingbao is the outward-facing path of the grand communal ritual. Lingbao absorbed the bureaucratic rituals of the celestial masters, but it introduced a massive new influence. Buddhism.
Wait, how does a Chinese bureaucratic tradition absorb Indian Buddhism?
By adapting its most appealing concepts, Lingbao introduced the profoundly Buddhist concept of universal salvation.
Prior to this, Taoist immortality was mostly a solitary pursuit for the elite, right?
Exactly. Lingbao introduced the idea that rituals should be performed to save the ancestors and benefit all of humanity. Furthermore, they adopted the sprawling Buddhist cosmology, restructuring the heavens into 32 horizontal realms.
It's remarkable how Taoism behaves like an incredibly resilient sponge. It encounters local cults, foreign monasticism, and just absorbs their best technologies without losing its own identity.
Now we see this adaptability continue all the way up to the 12th century with the founding of the Quanzhen school, the school of complete reality.
Right, Quanzhen represents another massive adaptation. How did Wang Zi, the founder, change things?
Well, the celestial master priests were historically married, lived in the community, and passed teachings through families. Quanzhen, heavily influenced by Chan Buddhism, established a celibate ascetic monastic order.
Monks living in monasteries completely divorced from family life, focusing on inner alchemy and silent meditation.
Precisely. And it's a testament to the durability of Taoism that today the family-based celestial masters and the monastic Quanzhen order remain the two primary dominant branches.
Okay, so we've traced the history, but I am hung up on the central mechanism of all this. To understand why a piece of paper can theoretically heal a diseased liver, we have to examine the physics of their universe.
How did they believe the cosmos was actually constructed?
Right, because as Isabel Ravina points out in our source, the unifying thread of Taoism isn't its pantheon of gods. The gods change names and ranks.
The true unity is found in its cosmological discourse, the shared understanding of how reality is built.
Let's unpack the architecture of the cosmos. How does the formless Tao, the void, actually generate a physical universe filled with trees, rivers, and humans, the 10,000 things?
It is entirely conceived as a process of continuous structured descent. The Tao is the absolute, infinite, without form or boundary.
Yet it contains the supreme principle of total unity.
Exactly. And when this unfathomable Tao begins to manifest, it steps down into existence by generating the three fundamental building blocks of the cosmos, the three treasures.
The Sanbao. Jing, Qi, and Chen.
Oh.
I really want to spend time defining these. It seems like if you don't understand these three, you can't understand anything else in Taoism.
They truly are the grammar of the universe. Let's start with Jing. Jing translates to essence. It is the underlying principle that presides over physical matter and all material entities.
Okay, Jing is matter.
Then we have Qi, which is often translated as breath or vital energy. Qi is the dynamic principle that animates the cosmos, the force driving continuous change.
And finally, Shen.
Which translates to spirit. Shin is the principle governing all non-material, formless entities, including the divine intelligence of the gods.
To make this tangible, I've heard analogies comparing these to modern concepts. Like Jing is hardware, Shen is software, and Qi is electricity.
That's one way to look at it, sure.
But that feels a bit too mechanical for an ancient nature-based philosophy. A better way might be looking at water.
Oh, the water metaphor is vastly superior.
Right, so Jing is like solid, ice-dense, physical matter. Qi's like flowing liquid water energy movement. And Shen is like unseen water vapor ethereal, formless.
But fundamentally the exact same substance.
It's all the same Tao, just operating at different frequencies of density.
That metaphor illustrates the continuity perfectly. They are phases of the same ultimate reality. And what is truly profound is that Taoism posits these three treasures exist in two distinct temporal states. First, pre-celestially.
Meaning before the physical universe even formed.
Yeah.
As pure cosmic principles.
Yes. But they also exist post-celestially. And this is the crux of it all. They exist post-celestially, manifesting right now, inside your physical human body.
This was the moment the source material really clicked for me. So in my body right now, Shen, the cosmic spirit, is manifesting as my mind, my consciousness.
Yes.
The cosmic energy is my rhythmic physical breathing and the vitality running through my nervous system.
Correct.
And Jing, the cosmic matter, materializes as the most fundamental generative liquids of the human body, specifically semen in men and menstrual blood in women.
The human being is not just living in the universe. The human being is a perfect miniaturized replica of it, a microcosm mirroring the macrocosm.
The exact same primordial forces that ignited the stars are currently digesting my breakfast. But the very act of the universe being created, of the one stepping down into the many, is viewed with a profound sense of tragedy, isn't it?
Yes, the source highlights a deeply unsettling story from the Zhuangzi about the death of Hunden.
Hunden translates to chaos, right?
Usually, yes. But we have to discard the modern connotation of chaos as a violent mess. In Taoism, Hundan refers to a state that is inchoate. It contains all potential, perfectly blended, before it's forced into distinct
A
shapes.
state of pristine, chaotic harmony.
Exactly.
So the story goes that Emperor Hundan ruled the central region of the world. And he was unique because he didn't have any bodily openings. No eyes, ears, mouth, or nostrils. Just a smooth, unbroken entity.
Right.
Now, two other emperors, the Emperor of the North Sea and the Emperor of the South Sea, visited Hundan. And he was always incredibly hospitable. So they wanted to repay his kindness. They thought, everyone has 7 holes to see, hear, eat, and breathe. Poor Hundan has none. Let's help him out.
Their intentions, from their limited perspective, were entirely altruistic.
Right. So every day, for 7 days, they take their tools and kindly bore a new hole into poor Emperor Hundan. And on the 7th day, when they finish the final hole, Hundan dies.
It is one of the most devastatingly profound metaphors in ancient literature.
It really is.
The scholar Norman Girardot has written extensively on this. Hundan dies because the emperors of the North and South represent duality. They represent left and right and wrong, the imposition of structured, defined categories.
So when they force their artificial social order onto the perfectly unbroken harmony of Hundan, they kill him.
The very act of applying structure destroys the magic. The shift from chaos to a structured cosmos is fundamentally a loss of unity. The creation of the world is a tragic fragmentation of the Tao.
Wait, I'm stuck on the implications of this. If the universe starting is essentially a tragic loss of unity, does that mean Daoists view physical reality as a mistake?
Not a mistake, no.
But if imposing order kills the original harmony, is Taoist practice basically trying to run the universe in reverse?
Yeah.
Are they literally trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube to get back to the state before the Big Bang?
You have articulated the absolute core of Taoist soteriology.
Yeah.
Yes. They view the current state of multiplicity as a state of profound alienation from our true source.
So salvation has to be a process of ascent.
Exactly. Every single legitimate Taoist practice is an engineered attempt to reverse the flow of creation. They are systematically unwinding the multiplicity of the cosmos to return to the unbroken one.
Literally putting the toothpaste back in the tube.
Yeah.
But to navigate backward, you need a map. And Taoists built that map using what the texts call emblems.
Chinese correlative cosmology is an incredibly intricate system that utilizes abstract emblems to categorize the forces of the universe. The most foundational is yin and yang.
They aren't static objects, though.
No, they are emblems of duality itself, the complementary, alternating negative and positive forces that generate all phenomena.
Then you step down into the 5 agents: wood, fire, soil, metal, and water. In reading the source, it's crucial to understand these aren't just literal elements.
They act as cosmic filing cabinets, dynamic phases of transformation. For instance, wood categorizes the direction east, spring, the color green, Jupiter, and within the human microcosm, the liver.
So my liver is conceptually vibrating at the exact same frequency as the planet Jupiter.
In their view, there is a literal, tangible resonance connecting them. If you manipulate one, you affect the others. And the most critical agent is soil, because it represents the center, the pivot point connecting multiplicity back to unity.
They also use the 8 trigrams of the I Ching, and they heavily utilize astronomy, particularly the Northern Dipper.
The Northern Dipper sits at the absolute center of the celestial vault. It acts as a cosmic engine, distributing qi. A Taoist priest uses ritual footwork to symbolically walk the pattern of its stars,
Aligning their internal engine with the universe's engine. So we have the map. But if you're a human trapped at the bottom, surrounded by sickness and demons, how do you actually communicate with the forces running the simulation?
You have to learn to speak their language, which requires us to look at the staggering bureaucracy of heavens and gods.
And their heaven is not just fluffy clouds with angels, it's heavily zoned. Lingbao Daoism arranged 32 heavens horizontally, while Shangqing mapped 36 heavens vertically.
And at the absolute zenith of the Shangqing vertical system, you find the 3 clarities, the Sanqing, the highest gods in the pantheon.
But they don't govern alone. You have Taiyi, the Great One, and Yuhuang, the Jade Sovereign. What fascinated me about the Jade Sovereign is he wasn't originally a high Taoist concept.
No, he was a popular local god.
Beloved by the common people. So much so that the Taoist elite basically gave him a promotion and incorporated him into their orthodox pantheon.
That phenomenon highlights one of the most brilliant survival strategies of Taoism. They absorbed popular local gods to systematize local superstition into orthodox cosmology.
Like absorbing Mazu, the sea goddess. They draft the gods of the peasants into the grand Taoist bureaucracy.
By integrating her, they were saying, yes, your goddess is real, but she answers to the Jade Sovereign who answers to the three clarities.
But here's the most counterintuitive fact about these high Chinese deities. If I close my eyes and pour my heart out in a spoken prayer, they aren't listening.
According to the scholar Anna Seidel, Chinese deities neither speak nor listen, but write and read.
That is a massive paradigm shift. The primary mode of communication is not auditory. It is administrative and textual.
The highest gods reveal teachings in the form of luminous scriptures that literally coalesce from pure cosmic breath. And humans communicate back through highly structured written memorials known as shu.
The priest literally drafts a formal document announcing a ritual, listing the sponsors, and ritually delivering it via fire.
The burning transmits its essence to the heavenly archives. But the most potent application of divine writing is the talismans, the fu.
Let's look at talismans. I thought a talisman was just a lucky charm you buy at a temple gift shop.
In this context, it is an instrument of immense cosmic power. A piece of paper or wood with highly stylized, flowing rafts. To an ordinary human, they look like illegible squiggles.
But to the gods, they are perfectly legible text.
Because talismans are exact earthly replicas of documents that exist in heaven, written in the esoteric script of the divine.
So a talisman is not a magic wand. It is a cosmic ID card, a legally binding contract. When a priest waves a talisman at a demon, he's showing the demon his badge.
He is proving he has authorized administrative clearance from the highest clarities to banish them.
It provides such a profound sense of control. If the universe is terrifying, imagining you can just file a grievance with the celestial manager gives you a tremendous psychological anchor.
It completely rationalizes the terror of existence.
But filing paperwork is just playing the game within the system. The ultimate goal is to transcend the administrative system entirely. The goal is immortality.
Which brings us to the doctrine of salvation, soteriology.
How to cheat death.
In religious Daoism, liberation is profoundly somatic. It's not about an immaterial soul floating away. The goal is the generation of a new, refined, immortal body.
And the loopholes they invented for this are staggering. Let's talk about Shiji. Release from the corpse. This is the greatest cosmic tax evasion scheme in history.
Shiji is a highly theatrical ritual. It emerges to solve a problem. Imagine an adept who isn't quite ready to ascend directly to heaven. They need more time, but their allotted mortal lifespan is expiring. The bureaucrats of death are coming.
So rather than accept death, they fake it.
They execute a feigned death. The adept drafts a specific talisman, visualizes themselves as deceased, strips off their clothing, shedding their mortal ties, and absconds into the deep mountains.
But they leave a prop in the coffin, a sword, a wooden staff, or sandals. And the family has to play along and bury the sword.
The complicity of the family is essential, and the crucial mechanical step. The adept legally changes their name.
Why? To trick the scribes of the underworld bureaucracy, in Chinese, changing name is phonetically identical to changing destiny.
The underworld agents check their ledger, find the sword disguised by the talisman, and check the adept off the list. Meanwhile, the adept is hiding under a fake name, buying decades of extra time to refine their immortal body.
Pure bureaucratic genius. But to understand how they generate this immortal body, we have to discard modern anatomy.
Taoism does not care about physical meat and bone. The body is a landscape, a political state, a theology in miniature.
The source outlines the symbolic body. The heart acts as the ruler, but the true engines are the three cinnabar fields, the dantian.
These are non-physical energetic loci. The lower cinnabar field in the abdomen is the seat of jing. The middle field in the heart region is qi. The upper field in the brain is shen.
And these fields mirror the external macrocosm. Your internal organs are vibrating in sympathy with the planets and seasons.
However, the body is a deeply contested battleground. It hosts parasites.
The parasites, this was viscerally disturbing.
Yeah.
The 3 corpses and the 9 worms.
Every human is born with the 3 corpses, one in the head, chest, and abdomen. Accompanying them are the 9 worms in the digestive system. They cause disease, aging, and death.
But they are malicious, sentient bureaucratic spies.
Yes. The texts state, these parasites leave your body while you sleep and travel to the celestial courts to deliver highly detailed reports on your private sins.
And heaven deducts days from your lifespan based on the reports. I'm fascinated by the psychology here. They outsource their guilt to a demonic snitch living inside their chest. If I'm dying, it's because the worm told the gods I lied to my neighbor.
It perfectly intertwines morality, bureaucracy, and physiology. And they developed methods for neutralizing these spies. The critical detail is what they eat, the essence of cereals, grains.
So avoiding grains in ancient China wasn't about cutting carbs. It was literal spiritual warfare. You go on a grain-free diet to starve out the divine snitches.
If the worms eat grain, you stop eating grain. But you must also actively nourish the gods that reside within you through intense visualization.
The Book of the Yellow Court describes a bureaucracy of luminous gods inside the organs. You have to maintain focus to keep them at their desks.
Because if they abandon your body, the infrastructure collapses and you die.
But there is one inner god who outranks all the others, the Red Child.
A concept of immense theological importance. The adept visualizes an infant deity inside their stomach, and this red child is explicitly identified as Lord Lao himself.
The creator of the cosmos is curled up in my stomach.
Because he represents the absolute true self, the practitioner must nourish this divine infant by feeding it a yellow essence from the moon and a red breath from the sun.
Funneling cosmic energy into your stomach to feed a baby god. That evolves directly into alchemy, right?
Yes. It evolves into the crucible, the historical shift from external to internal alchemy. Let's start with external alchemy. Wyden.
Wyden developed around the 3rd century CE, compounding physical elixirs using highly toxic minerals like cinnabar and lead. But they weren't just doing rudimentary chemistry.
No, it was a cosmological reenactment. The architecture of the sealed crucible is designed to physically replicate the state of Hunden, the unbroken unity of the cosmos.
You take differentiated minerals, apply highly regulated cycles of fire, and force them to revert backward in time to their pristine pre-cosmic essence.
Running the timeline of the universe in reverse inside a pot, the resulting elixir is considered a drop of the pure Dao.
And ingesting it grants immortality. But the elixir is so powerful you don't even have to risk drinking it. Just holding a piece repels demons.
But a profound theoretical revolution occurs, catalyzed by an esoteric text called the Canton Qi, the seal of the unity of the three.
This text takes the abstract emblems of the I Ching, the trigrams, and applies them to the alchemical process.
Focusing on Qian, representing true yang, and Kun, representing true yin. The author argued alchemy is about the reintegration of true yang and true yin back into absolute unity.
In the external labs, they used physical lead and cinnabar, but eventually, a realization dawns. Relentlessly drinking heavy metals is a very efficient way to die.
Elixir poisoning undeniably forced a reevaluation. But the philosophical shift was profound. They reasoned. If the human body is already a perfect microcosm of the universe, why build a bronze lab outside?
The ingredients are already inside the house, and thus, Needon is born. Internal alchemy.
The physical laboratory is completely discarded. The crucible is the human body itself. The ingredients are your jing, qi, and shen.
The adept becomes the laboratory, furnace, water, fire, and raw ingredients all at once.
Exactly. And it requires the mastery of Jing and Ming. Jing is your inner nature, your mind. Ming is your physical vitality, your bodily destiny.
The mind and body must be refined together, conjoined cultivation.
Through intense meditation and breath rhythm, they systematically lead their internal components backward through the stages of cosmic creation, refining gross essence into breath, breath into spirit, and spirit into emptiness.
And they describe the culmination of this not as a chemical pill, but as the conception, gestation, and birth of an immortal embryo within the lower cinnabar field.
Forging a true person outside your person. Gestating your own indestructible self.
That is a staggering conceptual leap. We started with shamans reading stars, moved to curing diseases with paperwork, faking deaths with swords, boiling lead, and it all culminates in an adept sitting still, using their consciousness to gestate an immortal soul.
It is the ultimate expression of running the universe in reverse, gathering the scattered pieces of the cosmos within your flesh and forging them back into the unbroken unity of the Tao.
I think we need to synthesize the sheer scale of what we've unpacked today. We've completely shattered the illusion that Taoism is just a passive philosophy to reduce your stress levels.
It is light years beyond a passive philosophy. It is a highly rigorous, imaginative methodology for escaping the gravity of mortality.
They use moral checklists, astral projection, bureaucratic loopholes, and internal crucibles.
It operates simultaneously as philosophy, religion, science, psychology, and celestial administration, a holistic map of reality.
So, to you, the listener, here is the takeaway. The next time you see a serene yin-yang symbol printed on a coffee mug, or hear a quote about the Tao being like water, you now possess the other half of the map.
You know, the vibrant universe of celestial bureaucrats, talismans, grain-eating parasites, and alchemical crucibles standing right behind that quote.
You know, the machinery running beneath the philosophy.
And as we conclude, there is one final, intensely provocative thought from an 18th century Taoist alchemist named Liu Yiming.
Let's hear it.
After centuries of Taoists developing these unimaginably complex rituals and internal maps, Liu Yiming writes this reflection regarding the ultimate prize, the golden elixir.
He wrote, and I quote,
Yeah.
"All human beings have this golden elixir complete in themselves. The golden elixir is in front of your eyes."
It's a statement that forces you to completely question the necessity of the entire elaborate cosmic scavenger hunt.
Exactly. It leaves you with this incredible paradox. What if the ultimate goal of all these exhausting rituals, all this heavy lifting to reverse the creation of the universe, what if the final revelation is simply waking up to the realization that the immortal embryo has been sitting right there inside you, completely intact the entire time? It's a universe of profoundly muddy waters, but maybe the clarity was always there, just waiting to be noticed.